The air hung heavy with the aroma of burnt coffee and stale hope. It was the kind of place where dreams came to die, where the weight of the world seemed to press down on every patron. Rain lashed against the windows of the dimly lit coffee shop, creating a rhythmic drumming that matched the heartbeat of the city outside.
Detective Miller, a man sculpted by years on the force, sat hunched over his lukewarm coffee. His eyes, once sharp and full of life, now seemed dulled by the weight of countless unsolved cases. The bitter liquid did little to wash away the fatigue etched on his face. Each sip was a reminder of the sleepless nights and the relentless pursuit of justice. The case, the damn case, clung to him like a shroud. It was a constant presence, a shadow that followed him everywhere he went. Miller ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture that had become almost second nature. His mind raced with thoughts, each one more troubling than the last. His eyes fixated on the swirling patterns in his coffee, as if searching for answers in the dark liquid. The patterns seemed to mock him, offering no solace or clarity. He was a man of routine, finding solace in the familiar. The predictability of his daily rituals was a small comfort in an otherwise chaotic world. The worn leather of his booth at Joe's Diner, a place that had seen better days, was one of those comforts. It was a sanctuary of sorts, a place where he could momentarily escape the madness. The comforting weight of his revolver always by his side was another. It was a reminder of his duty, his purpose. The scent of old books in his apartment, these were his anchors. They grounded him, kept him from drifting too far into the abyss. But the financier's death, it threatened to pull him under. It was a case that defied logic, one that gnawed at the edges of his sanity.
The financier, a titan of Wall Street, found dead in his penthouse. A man who seemed invincible, brought down in the prime of his life. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist, leaving behind a void that demanded answers. A man at the peak of his game, gone, just like that. It was a mystery that seemed to defy explanation, a puzzle with too many missing pieces.
The official cause of death, heart failure. But Miller knew better. He had seen too much, experienced too many coincidences to believe in such a simple explanation. Except something about it didn't sit right with Miller. There were too many loose ends, too many unanswered questions. The way the man's widow spoke, too composed, too rehearsed. It was as if she had practiced her lines, prepared for this moment. The faint tremor in her hand as she handed him a glass of water. It was a small detail, but one that spoke volumes to a seasoned detective like Miller.
The bell above the diner door chimed, a sound that brought him back to the present. Snapping Miller out of his thoughts, he straightened up, his senses on high alert. He glanced up, his eyes scanning the newcomers, each face a potential threat or ally, a reflex honed from years of living on the edge. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not even for a moment. A young woman, her face obscured by a large hood, hurried in. Her movements were quick, almost frantic, her gaze darting nervously around the diner. She was clearly out of place, a fish out of water in this den of lost souls. Heart failure, they said, but was it really that simple?
Miller muttered to the figure across from him. Dr. Evans, a cardiologist with a mind as sharp as a scalpel and a reputation for solving the unsolvable, leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in deep thought.
It's not uncommon at his age, especially with the stress of his job, but there are always other factors to consider.
But what if it wasn't natural? What if something or someone made his heart fail? What if there was foul play involved?
Evans raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He had met Miller on several occasions, consulted on cases where the line between medicine and murder blurred. This case seemed no different.
What are you suggesting, Detective? Are you implying something more sinister?
Miller produced a file from his worn briefcase, placing it on the table between them. The file was thick, filled with reports and photographs.
The financier, his name was Arthur Harding, found dead in his penthouse a week ago. No obvious signs of foul play.
Evans flipped open the file, his eyes scanning the preliminary reports. He noted the absence of toxins and physical trauma.
Everything seems in order. No signs of toxins, no blunt force trauma. It all points to a natural cause.
Exactly, it's too clean. Harding was a man who made enemies, powerful enemies. He wasn't the type to just keel over from a heart attack.
Evans leaned in, his curiosity piqued. He knew Miller well enough to trust his instincts.
So what's your theory? What do you think really happened to Harding?
I think someone tampered with his pacemaker. It's the only explanation that fits the evidence.
That's a bold claim, Miller. But if you're right, we need to find out who had access to his medical devices.
The room fell silent as both men pondered the implications. The case of the fallen financier was far from over. They had a long road ahead, filled with twists and turns, but they were ready to uncover the truth. Days turned into sleepless nights as Miller delved deeper into Harding's life. The case was consuming him, every detail a piece of a larger, more complex puzzle. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that this was no ordinary heart attack. There were too many inconsistencies, too many unanswered questions. Harding's schedule was a whirlwind of high-stakes meetings and ruthless business deals. He was a man who thrived on pressure, but it also made him many enemies. He had stepped on countless toes on his ascent to the top. Enemies, he had plenty. Each one with a potential motive, each one a possible suspect. But who would be audacious enough to orchestrate his death right under the nose of the city's elite? The list of suspects was long, but the method was unique. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Dr. Evans. A seasoned professional, his insight was invaluable. After examining Harding's medical records, Evans had stumbled upon a curious detail. Harding had a pacemaker. This was no ordinary device, a top-of-the-line model, implanted just a year ago. It was supposed to be the best, the most reliable.
These devices are marvels of modern technology, but they're not foolproof. Even the best technology has its vulnerabilities.
What are you saying? Could someone have used this to their advantage?
I've been analyzing the data logs from Harding's pacemaker. The information is revealing. There's a series of anomalies, spikes in activity, right before his time of death. These spikes are not normal. It's as if someone remotely accessed his pacemaker and tampered with the settings. This was no accident.
Miller felt a chill run down his spine. The implications were terrifying. This wasn't just murder. It was a meticulously planned execution. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure Harding's death.
We need to find out who had the capability to do this. This was a sophisticated operation.
I'll help you, Miller. Let's catch this ghost. Together we can uncover the truth and bring the perpetrator to justice.
The investigation took a sharp turn from the sterile world of finance to the neon-lit labyrinth of cyberspace. Officer Chen, the department's resident tech whiz, was tasked with unraveling the digital threads of the case. His fingers danced across the keyboard, his eyes glued to the multiple screens that flickered with lines of code.
Finding the source of the hack is like tracing a ghost. The perpetrator used several layers of encryption and bounced their signal through multiple servers around the globe.
Days turned into weeks, each passing hour adding to the pressure. Miller paced the room, the weight of the case pressing down on him.
Got it. I've managed to isolate the origin point of the hack. It's a burner account, but I've traced it back to a public Wi-Fi network, in a cafe not far from Harding's penthouse.
The breakthrough was the first glimmer of hope in a case that had seemed as murky as the city's underbelly.
Let's move. We need to catch them before they disappear.
I'm on it, Detective.
The cafe, a hipster haven with exposed brick walls and overpriced coffee, was abuzz with activity.
Miller, his eyes scanning the faces of patrons, felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment of truth.
He spotted her then, Victoria Harding, seated in a secluded corner, her laptop open, her fingers flying across the keyboard.
She was meeting with someone, a young man with a shock of red hair and a nervous energy that crackled in the air. Miller recognized him from the security footage of the building where Harding lived.
He was a frequent visitor to Victoria's apartment. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place.
Get a warrant for their arrest, Miller barked into his phone, his voice low and urgent. And get a team down here. We need to move fast. As the officers closed in, Victoria looked up, her eyes widening in recognition, a flicker of fear betraying her carefully crafted composure.
Victoria Harding, you're under arrest for the murder of Arthur Harding.
You have no idea what you're getting into, Detective.
We'll see about that.
The game was over. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Victoria Harding sat across from Miller, her composure finally cracking.
It was his idea, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper.
Her gaze darted nervously towards the two-way mirror, imagining the young man, her accomplice, listening on the other side.
The young man, it turned out, was a skilled hacker, a ghost in the machine who could manipulate the digital world with ease. He had been hired by Victoria not to kill her husband, but to make it look like an accident. A generous donation to his account, a promise of a life free from the shadows. That's all it took. Arthur was a monster. He was cold, calculating, and obsessed with money.
The weight of her lies had become too heavy to bear.
You'll have your day in court, Victoria. I'd seen this before, the desperation, the attempt to distance oneself from the consequences of their actions. The young man was a pawn, a tool used by a woman driven by greed and a thirst for revenge. I watched, my face etched with fatigue and a hint of sadness as Victoria was led away, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and regret. The lines between the real and digital world were blurring, technology becoming both a weapon and a shield. I was a detective, and this was my city, my never-ending puzzle to solve.